The strangest thing about war is that it sometimes hides the most valuable person in the room behind the simplest label. Germany, April 1945. Morning arrived without birdsong. It came instead with the low growl of military trucks, the distant rumble of collapsing masonry, and the sharp scent of antiseptic drifting through a school building that no longer belonged to children. The red brick gymnasium had become the largest American field hospital for nearly 40 miles, its polished wooden floor buried beneath rows of iron cots, folding tables, crates of plasma, and exhausted men who had not slept in days. Outside, spring tried stubbornly to return. Cherry trees stood beyond the broken fence, their pale blossoms trembling in the cool breeze as if unaware that Europe had nearly destroyed itself. Sunlight spilled across the courtyard where shattered statues lay half-covered in dust, while army ambulances rolled continuously through the gates, each one bringing another load of wounded soldiers and frightened civilians. Inside, there was no silence. Doctors shouted for instruments. Orderlies hurried between beds carrying enamel basins stained pink with diluted blood. Generators rattled somewhere behind the building, their steady rhythm competing with coughs, groans, hurried footsteps, and the occasional cry of someone waking from surgery before the ether had completely faded. Captain Daniel Carter barely noticed any of it anymore. 36 years old, broad-shouldered, with the permanent shadow of fatigue beneath his blue eyes, he moved from one patient to another with the mechanical precision of a man whose body continued long after his mind had stopped asking permission. He had trained at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Before the war, he had repaired broken bones after factory accidents and delivered babies during winter snowstorms. Now he measured success differently. If someone was still breathing by sunset, it had been a good day. His sleeves were rolled above his elbows. Dried blood darkened the cuffs. A pair of cracked spectacles rested in his breast pocket, forgotten since dawn. "Next patient," he said without lifting his eyes. The words disappeared beneath the endless movement surrounding him. No one counted hours anymore. Only survivors. Near the far wall of the gymnasium, separated from the patients by little more than a line of stacked supply crates, sat 12 German prisoners awaiting transport to a larger detention camp. They wore faded gray uniforms stripped of insignia, their belongings reduced to blankets, tin cups, and the uncertainty that came after surrender. Most kept their heads lowered. Some stared blankly through shattered windows. Others watched the Americans with expressions too exhausted to be called fear. Among them sat a young woman whose hands rested quietly in her lap. Anna Weiss, 24 years old. Her blonde hair had been cut short months earlier for practicality, though loose strands now escaped beneath a plain gray scarf. Dust clung to her boots. Her coat hung loosely across narrow shoulders made thinner by months of shortages, yet nothing about the way she sat suggested defeat. She observed. She listened. She remembered. An elderly German woman lying several beds away began coughing violently, struggling to breathe through fever that had worsened overnight. One of the American orderlies glanced toward her before continuing past, assuming another medic would eventually arrive. No one did. There were too many emergencies. Too many names. Too many bodies. Anna instinctively leaned forward. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden bench before stopping. She was not staff. She was not family. She was not even considered a civilian. She was simply a prisoner. A military policeman standing nearby noticed her movement. Without anger, but without kindness either, he gave a small shake of his head. "Not your place." Anna slowly released her grip. She lowered her eyes again. Across the crowded hospital, Captain Daniel Carter passed within 20 feet of her without the briefest glance. To him, she was another gray uniform waiting to be processed after the war, another anonymous face among hundreds crossing his path each week. He did not know that the quiet prisoner by the wall had spent years inside operating rooms. He did not know that her steady hands had once assisted surgeons through nights far longer than this one. Most of all, he did not know that before another day had ended, the busiest American doctor in the hospital would stop everything, look directly at the woman no one had truly seen, and ask for her help. The afternoon settled over the field hospital with the heavy stillness that always came before another wave of casualties. Outside, the air smelled of damp earth and crushed grass. Somewhere beyond the school grounds, church bells rang for the first time in weeks, their distant echoes swallowed by the rumble of American transport trucks moving east. Inside the gymnasium, time obeyed different rules. Every minute was measured in blood loss. Every decision carried the weight of a human life. Captain Daniel Carter rinsed his hands in a chipped enamel basin while an orderly hurried toward him with another clipboard. 6 incoming, the young corporal said. Vehicle accident outside Leipzig. 2 civilians. 4 hours. Daniel nodded once. No questions. There was never enough time for questions. The ambulance doors burst open moments later. Medics wheeled stretchers across the polished floor, boots squeaking against old basketball lines barely visible beneath layers of mud and dried blood. A boy no older than 12 clutched his mother's sleeve, his face streaked with soot. An American private groaned through clenched teeth, his left leg wrapped in a blanket already turning dark red. Operating table 3, Daniel ordered. Another medic pointed toward the frightened civilians. They only speak German, sir. Daniel looked around. The interpreter who usually handled civilian admissions was nowhere to be seen. Where's Klein? Food poisoning. Anyone else? The orderly shook his head. No, sir. Daniel exhaled quietly. Another problem. Another shortage. The elderly woman on the stretcher gripped the medic's wrist with surprising strength, speaking rapidly through panicked breaths. No one understood a single word. The young boy began crying. Not loudly, just enough to make everyone more anxious. One nurse attempted to comfort him with slow English. It only frightened him more. Near the supply crates, Anna watched. Everything without moving. The words reached her clearly. The woman's dialect carried traces of Saxony. Not fear. Pain. Severe abdominal pain. Anna knew the difference immediately. She lowered her eyes again. Not your place. The military policeman's silent warning still lingered in her thoughts. Across the room, Daniel listened to the confused exchange for several seconds before making the only decision available. Sedate her. A nurse reached for the syringe. Anna's fingers tightened against her blanket. The woman suddenly cried out again. This time louder. One sentence. Just one. Anna closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Then she stood. The chains around no one's ankles had long been removed. Yet every prisoner understood there were invisible boundaries just as real. She crossed one of them. Slowly. Carefully. The military policeman stepped forward immediately. Back. Anna stopped. Her voice remained calm. Please. The single English word carried a soft German accent. I think, she says. The pain moved. The guard frowned. Daniel looked up for the first time. Not because of who had spoken, simply because someone had interrupted his examination. His eyes met hers across the crowded hospital. Gray prison coat. Thin face. Quiet posture. Just another prisoner. What did you say? He asked. Anna answered without taking another step. She says the pain was here this morning. She touched the lower right side of her own abdomen. Now here. Her hand moved higher. She says breathing hurts. Daniel stared at her for 2 silent seconds. Then he looked back at the patient. The woman nodded frantically. Exactly. Those were the places she had been trying to describe. The nurse holding the syringe hesitated. Daniel stepped closer to the stretcher himself. Gently, he pressed 2 fingers against the woman's abdomen. She cried out sharply. Different from before. Sharper. More localized. Daniel repeated the examination. Again, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not intestinal poisoning, he murmured. Possible ruptured appendix. The room shifted around him. Different diagnosis. Different treatment. Different chance of survival. He looked back toward the prisoner. She had not moved. She had not tried to appear important. She simply waited, hands folded before her, as though expecting to be dismissed the next second. How did you know? Daniel asked. Anna answered quietly. I heard the words. He frowned. No. Another pause. I mean, how did you know what they meant? For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Anna hesitated. Not because she lacked the answer. Because it belonged to a life everyone assumed had disappeared. I treated it before, she said. Nothing more. No explanation. No defense. Only 6 words. Daniel studied her face with new attention. There was no pride in it. No attempt to impress him. Only certainty. Behind them, another ambulance rolled into the courtyard. Another siren. Another rush of footsteps. The war had not stopped. But something almost invisible had shifted inside the crowded gymnasium. For the first time, Captain Daniel Carter no longer saw only a German prisoner standing near the wall. He saw a question he had somehow failed to ask. Daniel Carter had learned to distrust miracles. In a hospital like that, miracles usually meant someone had miscounted the bleeding, misread the pulse, or mistaken silence for recovery. Men did not survive because the world suddenly became merciful. They survived because someone noticed the small thing before it became fatal. A pulse fading beneath 2 fingers. A fever climbing by half a degree. A sentence spoken in pain that no one else understood. The German woman on the stretcher was taken to the makeshift operating room that had once been a classroom for arithmetic. Its blackboard still carried faint chalk marks beneath the stains of disinfectant. Multiplication tables. A child's handwriting. Numbers from a world where mistakes could be erased. This mistake could not. Daniel worked fast. The diagnosis Anna had translated proved correct. The appendix had ruptured. Infection had begun spreading through the abdomen, quiet and deadly, the kind that killed slowly if treated like stomach illness. The woman would have been sedated, delayed, and perhaps lost before evening. Instead, she was breathing after surgery. Weakly, but breathing. Daniel stood over the basin afterward, washing blood from his hands while rain began tapping against the broken gymnasium windows. The sound was soft at first, then steady, turning the courtyard dust into dark streaks of mud. Behind him, Lieutenant Harris, his senior nurse, gathered instruments from the tray. "That prisoner saved us an hour," she said. Daniel did not answer immediately. He watched pink water swirl down the drainpipe into a bucket below. "More than an hour," he said. He dried his hands on a towel already damp from too many uses and stepped back into the gymnasium. Anna was seated again near the supply crates, exactly where she had been before. Hands folded, eyes lowered, as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just changed the course of a woman's life by refusing to remain silent. The military policeman stood closer to her now, uncertain whether she had broken a rule or revealed a purpose. He looked at Daniel as the doctor approached. "Sir." Daniel stopped in front of Anna. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Around them, the hospital continued its brutal rhythm. A soldier coughed blood into a cloth. An orderly shouted for more bandages. Somewhere, a child whimpered in his sleep. Daniel's voice was even. "Where did you train?" Anna looked up. The question struck her more deeply than suspicion would have. Not "who are you?" Not "why did you interfere?" Where did you train? For a moment, the noise around her seemed to fall away. "Dresden," she said. "At a military hospital?" "No," she swallowed once. "Civilian hospital." Before they took it. Daniel heard the small weight inside those words. Before they took it. He did not ask who they were. He had already seen enough of Europe to know that almost every building had been taken by someone, for something, until nothing belonged to the people who had built it. How long? 3 years. Surgical ward. Then emergency intake. Lieutenant Harris had paused nearby. The military policeman shifted his weight. Daniel studied Anna's hands. Thin hands. Chapped skin. Clean nails despite the dirt ground into every seam of her coat. Hands that did not fidget. Hands that remembered work. "You speak English," he said. "A little. Enough to understand me?" "Sometimes." He almost smiled. Almost. Another stretcher rolled past behind him. A young American corporal lay motionless beneath a gray blanket, his face so pale it seemed already carved from wax. Daniel turned his head. Then he looked back at Anna. There were rules. Clear ones. Prisoners did not assist medical staff. Enemy nationals did not move freely through American field hospitals. Doctors did not place trust in people they had met less than an hour earlier. But rules were easier to respect when patients were not dying faster than paperwork could be written. Daniel removed his spectacles from his pocket, wiped them with the edge of his sleeve, and put them on. The gesture made him look older. More tired. More human. "I need someone who can speak to the German civilians," he said. Anna did not answer. Not yet. Her eyes moved briefly toward the guard. Daniel saw it. "You would stay where I can see you," he continued. "You would translate only. No instruments. No medicine. No movement without permission." Anna's face remained still, but something in her shoulders changed. Not relief. Recognition. A door had opened 1 inch. Enough for breath to pass through. The military policeman frowned. "Captain, regulations. I know the regulations." Daniel did not raise his voice. That made the words heavier. He looked at Anna again. "Can you help?" The question landed softly, but every person close enough to hear it became still. A doctor. An officer. An American. asking a German prisoner for help. Anna stood slowly. She did not smile. She did not thank him. She simply straightened her coat, lifted her chin, and answered in the calm voice of someone stepping back into a life the war had tried to erase. Yes, Captain. Outside, rain slid down the broken windows. Inside, for the first time, the prisoner by the wall was given work only she could do. Respect rarely arrived with applause. More often, it appeared as a single task quietly placed into the hands of someone everyone else had overlooked. The rain continued through the afternoon, drumming softly against the cracked windows while the field hospital grew. Even more crowded. Every truck that crossed the school courtyard seemed to carry another story the war had refused to finish. Mud covered the entrance. Water dripped from canvas stretchers. The smell of wet wool mixed with ether, iodine, and fresh coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. Anna stood beside Lieutenant Harris, translating simple questions as wounded German civilians were admitted. What is your name? Where does it hurt? When did the fever begin? She spoke calmly, never louder than necessary, never adding her own opinion. Only the truth that patients were too frightened or exhausted to express in English. Daniel noticed something unexpected. The waiting area had become quieter. Children stopped crying sooner. Older patients relaxed when they heard familiar words spoken gently instead of shouted through confusion. Translation, he realized, was more than exchanging languages. It was restoring trust. An elderly farmer arrived with a deep wound across his shoulder after being struck by falling timber. As Harris prepared bandages, the man refused to let anyone touch him, gripping the sides of the stretcher with trembling hands. They're taking my arm, he whispered repeatedly in German. Anna stepped closer. She knelt until her eyes met his. No, she said softly. They're trying to save it. The old man searched her face. Are you certain? I am. He loosened his grip. Only then did Harris begin cleaning the wound. She glanced briefly toward Anna. Thank you, she murmured almost without thinking. It was the first time anyone on the American staff had thanked her. The words lingered longer than either woman expected. Another ambulance arrived before sunset. This one carried mostly civilians evacuated from a nearby village. Among them was a little girl no older than 7. Her light brown dress was torn at the sleeve. One shoe was missing. She clung desperately to a worn cloth rabbit, soaked by rain, and refused to release her unconscious mother's hand. An American medic lifted her gently aside, while doctors rushed the woman towards surgery. The child screamed, not with anger, with terror. Every attempt to comfort her failed. One nurse offered chocolate. Another tried smiling. A young corporal removed his helmet and knelt beside her. Nothing worked. The girl's cries echoed through the gymnasium, drawing anxious glances from every bed. Daniel looked over while preparing another patient. Can someone calm her? No one answered. Everyone was already occupied. Without waiting for permission, Anna walked slowly toward the child. She did not reach for her. She did not interrupt the crying. Instead, she crouched several feet away and placed both hands quietly on her own knees. The girl continued sobbing. Anna remained silent. A full half-minute passed. Then, in gentle German, she said only one sentence. Your rabbit stayed with you. The little girl looked down. The toy was still clutched tightly against her chest. Anna smiled very faintly. He looks frightened too. The child blinked through tears. He does. I think he needs someone brave to hold him. Silence. The crying softened. The little girl hugged the rabbit closer. I can do that, she whispered. I know. Nothing magical had happened. No dramatic speech. No impossible promise that everything would be all right. Just a frightened child who had been reminded she could still protect something. Daniel had watched the entire exchange from across the room. He realized Anna had never once lied to the girl. She had not said her mother would live. She had not promised the war would end. She had offered something smaller. Something true. A reason to take the next breath. Lieutenant Harris approached Daniel as the child allowed herself to be led toward a cot. I've never seen that done before. Daniel kept watching Anna. Neither have I. Around them, conversations had begun changing. The orderlies no longer referred to her only as the prisoner. One quietly asked, Can she translate this? Another said, Where's the German nurse? The correction came naturally. No announcement. No formal decision. Simply the slow replacement of one label with another. Anna heard none of it. She was helping an old woman drink warm broth. holding the tin cup with both steady hands as though she had been doing the same work every day of her life. Perhaps, Daniel thought, she had. Perhaps the war had only interrupted it. And for the first time since opening the hospital inside the shattered school, he found himself wondering not what rules prevented her from helping more, but what they had already lost by asking her to remain silent. By evening, the hospital had stopped pretending it was temporary. The school gymnasium no longer looked like a place borrowed for emergency use. It had become a country of its own, with borders made of bed sheets, laws written in exhaustion, and a language built from pain, command, and breath. Rainwater gathered in shallow puddles near the entrance. Mud tracked across the floor in dark lines. The air tasted of metal and boiled coffee. Anna moved through it under Daniel's supervision, never touching what she had not been told to touch, never stepping where she had not been permitted to step. Yet the space around her changed wherever she went. A patient answered sooner. A child stopped trembling. A nurse understood a symptom before it became a crisis. Small things. Necessary things. Near dusk, a convoy arrived from the Eastern Road. Not 6 patients this time. Not 12. More than 30. The first stretcher came in before anyone had finished clearing the last bed. Then another. Then another. American soldiers, German civilians, 2 prisoners from a collapsed work detail, all soaked through by rain and road water. Daniel stood in the center aisle and saw the truth before anyone said it. They did not have enough hands. Use the hallway, he ordered. It's already full, sir. Then clear the storage room. It's got supplies stacked to the ceiling. Move them. His voice stayed controlled. That was how people knew things were bad. Lieutenant Harris appeared at his side, face pale beneath a smear of iodine on her cheek. We're short 2 nurses, she said. Miller collapsed. Thompson's with the surgical case. Daniel looked toward the treatment tables. 3 open wounds. 1 abdominal injury. 1 man coughing pink foam into a blanket. 1 civilian woman shaking with fever so hard the cot legs rattled beneath her. The room narrowed. Not from fear. From arithmetic. Too many bodies. Too little time. Anna stood beside a supply crate holding a stack of clean towels. She had heard enough to understand the problem, even where English failed her. Her eyes moved from table to table, counting the way trained people counted. Bleeding. Breathing. Shock. Infection. Priority. Daniel followed her gaze. He saw the calculation. He also saw the boundary. A prisoner could translate. A prisoner could comfort. A prisoner could carry water under watch. But assisting treatment was something else. Lieutenant Harris saw his hesitation. Captain, she said quietly, we need someone at table 2. Daniel turned. On table 2 lay an American soldier no older than 20, his uniform cut open, his abdomen wrapped in blood-soaked gauze. His lips were blue. His hands opened and closed against the sheet, searching for something to hold. Daniel looked at Anna. The room seemed to hold its breath before he did. Miss Weiss. It was the first time he had used her name. Anna looked up. Yes, Captain. He pointed to the wash station. Scrub. A silence passed through the nearby staff like a draft through broken glass. The military policeman stepped forward. Sir, she can't. She can hold pressure, Daniel said. She can pass bandages. She can count pulse. She does nothing beyond what I tell her. The guard hesitated. Daniel did not look away from Anna. Can you do that? Anna did not answer quickly. She looked at the soldier on the table, then at the basin, then at her own hands. For months, those hands had carried buckets, folded blankets, accepted orders, and waited in lines. Before that, they had tied sutures, steadied lamps, cooled foreheads, and held the dying without looking away. She stepped to the wash station. Soap, water, a brush with stiff bristles. She scrubbed until her skin reddened. Daniel watched, not because he doubted her, because everyone else did. When she returned, Lieutenant Harris handed her clean gauze. No smile, no speech, just gauze. Anna took it the way a nurse took an instrument. Firmly, correctly. Daniel leaned over the wounded soldier. Pressure here. Anna placed both hands where he indicated. The soldier groaned. She did not flinch. Steady, Daniel said. It is. Steady, Anna answered. Across the room, rain beat harder against the windows. No one spoke of regulations. No one spoke of enemies. For 10 minutes, there was no prisoner and no American doctor. There was only blood beneath 2 hands, a life refusing to leave, in a room full of people watching the impossible become necessary. People often believe trust arrived all at once. It did not. It gathered quietly, one correct decision after another, until no one remembered the moment suspicion had begun to disappear. Night settled over the field hospital. The rain finally eased, leaving only the occasional drip from the damaged roof into metal buckets placed carefully along the gymnasium floor. Lanterns replaced daylight, casting long golden shadows across rows of cots where exhausted patients drifted between sleep and pain. The rush of casualties had slowed, not because the war had become gentler, only because darkness made transportation more dangerous. Daniel stood beside the operating table, flexing stiff fingers before removing his blood-stained gloves. His shoulders ached with the familiar weight of another endless day. Across the room, Anna was helping Lieutenant Harris organize fresh dressings. Every movement was economical. Bandages folded evenly. Instruments arranged by size. Bottles returned to the same position after each use. She never searched for anything twice. Harris watched for several minutes before speaking. "You've done this before." Anna looked up briefly. "Yes." "Recently." Anna hesitated. "Before the hospital closed." Harris nodded without asking another question. War had taught everyone that some memories deserved silence. A young orderly approached carrying a tray of sterilized instruments. As he reached the table, his tired foot caught the leg of a stool. The tray tilted. Scalpels, forceps, needle holders. Everything slid toward the floor. Before anyone reacted, Anna stepped forward. Her hands moved almost instinctively. One hand caught the tray. The other steadied the instruments before they scattered across the wooden floor. Nothing touched the ground. The orderly stared. "So sorry." Anna simply handed the tray back. "It happens." Daniel had seen the entire exchange. Not the speed, the familiarity. Someone without operating room experience would have reached for the falling tools. Someone trained protected sterility first. That difference could not be learned overnight. A few minutes later, another emergency arrived. An American sergeant with a deep laceration across his upper thigh. Heavy bleeding. Not immediately fatal, but dangerous. Daniel prepared the wound while Harris searched through supply cabinets. "We're out of large artery clamps. They're in the second cabinet." "No." "I checked." Anna looked toward the shelves. Without thinking, she said quietly, "Top drawer." Everyone turned. Harris frowned. "There isn't a top drawer." Anna pointed toward an old wooden cabinet standing against the far wall. "The upper compartment slides." "It isn't a drawer. It looks like a shelf." "It slides." Harris crossed the room. She pulled once. Nothing. She tried again. The wooden panel shifted outward with a dull scrape. Inside lay 3 unused artery clamps wrapped in clean cloth. She blinked. "I didn't even know this opened." Anna gave a faint smile. "It was built before the war." Daniel walked over slowly. "How did you know?" "I worked in buildings like this." She ran her fingers lightly across the cabinet. Schools often hid supplies from children. The answer sounded almost too ordinary, yet it revealed something larger. She noticed structures, patterns, details everyone else walked past. The surgery continued. Daniel reached out without looking. Clamp. Before Harris moved, Anna had already placed the correct instrument into his waiting hand. Not the smaller one. Not the curved forceps. Exactly the artery clamp he needed. Daniel paused for the briefest fraction of a second. He had not asked which clamp. She had known. Minutes later, he extended his hand again. Sutures. Again, the correct material rested in his palm before he finished speaking. The operation ended successfully. The sergeant would keep his leg. As Daniel washed his hands afterward, Harris leaned beside him. "You trusted her more than you realized." He looked at the water swirling pink beneath the tap. "I noticed." "You." Stopped checking. He thought back over the procedure. She had anticipated every request. Not hurried. Not guessed. Remembered. Like someone who had repeated the same sequence hundreds of times. Across the room, Anna carefully cleaned the instrument table before returning each item to its proper place. No one had told her to. She simply left the room better than she had found it. Daniel walked toward the stack of personal belongings collected from newly registered civilians. Most were labeled with names and tied together using rough string. One worn leather satchel caught his attention. Its identification tag had been smudged by rain. He wiped away the dirt with his thumb. The faded handwriting slowly emerged. Anna Weiss. Civilian effects. Curiosity stopped him. Not suspicion. Something else. He opened the satchel carefully. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a small prayer book, a cracked fountain pen, and beneath them, protected inside a weathered document envelope, several official papers tied together with blue ribbon. Daniel looked at the seals stamped across the top page. His expression changed. He had expected fragments of a forgotten life. Instead, he found proof that the quiet woman everyone still called a prisoner had once carried responsibilities few people inside the hospital could match. The first thing Daniel noticed was not the seal. It was the date. Before the city names became headlines. Before borders moved like wounds across maps. Before uniforms taught strangers to stop seeing one another clearly. The papers in Anna Weiss's satchel had been kept with almost impossible care. Their edges were worn, but not neglected. The blue ribbon had frayed at the knot. The ink had faded in places where rain or time had touched it, yet the words remained legible beneath the lantern light. Certificate of Nursing Qualification. Dresden Municipal Hospital. Surgical Assistant. Daniel read the lines once. Then again, not because they were difficult to understand, because they made the last several hours rearrange themselves in his mind. The steady hands. The correct instruments. The way she watched breathing before looking at wounds. The way frightened patients. Became calmer when she spoke. Not instinct. Training. Not luck. Experience. Lieutenant Harris came beside him, wiping her hands on a towel. What is it? Daniel handed her the first page. She read silently. Her expression softened, then tightened with something close to embarrassment. She was a surgical nurse. Daniel nodded. Senior assistant, it says. Harris looked across the gymnasium. Anna stood beside an old civilian man, translating Daniel's earlier instructions about fever and water. She held the man's tin cup while he drank, one hand steadying his elbow with the careful firmness of someone who knew dignity could be lost in small humiliations. Harris lowered the document. We've had her sitting against the wall for 2 days. Daniel said nothing. That was the trouble with truth. Once it arrived, it often made silence feel deserved. By morning, the rumor had already begun moving through the hospital. Not loudly. Hospitals had their own way of carrying news. A glance near the bandage station. A whisper over coffee. A sentence dropped while folding blankets. The German prisoner had papers. The German prisoner had training. The German prisoner was a nurse. By breakfast, someone had changed the words again. She was a senior nurse. By noon, someone else had added disbelief. Then why was she being transported with prisoners? No one had an answer. That never stopped people from speaking. A young private from Ohio refused her help when she approached his cot with fresh dressings. I don't want her touching me, he muttered. His jaw was clenched. His arm had been opened from wrist to elbow by shrapnel. Fever shone across his forehead. Pain had made him pale and cruel. Anna stopped. She did not argue. She simply turned to leave. Daniel, who had been checking the next bed, looked over. Private Ellis, he said. The young man stared at the ceiling. Yes, sir. She helped save Sergeant Nolan's leg last night. No answer. She also kept Mrs. Vogel alive long enough for surgery. Still nothing. Daniel stepped closer. His voice remained low. You may refuse treatment from anyone you wish, but you will not insult medical staff in this hospital. The word landed. Harder than an order. Staff. Anna looked at Daniel briefly. Only briefly, then lowered her eyes again. Private Ellis swallowed. The fever had drained some of his anger, but not all of it. She's German. So is half this room. She's the enemy. Daniel looked at the rows of wounded people around them. American uniforms. German coats. Civilian dresses. Blankets without flags. Right now, he said, infection is the enemy. No one laughed. The sentence was too plain to be clever. Too true to be dismissed. After a long moment, Ellis turned his head away. Fine. Anna returned to the cot. She cleaned the wound without haste, without resentment, without any sign that the refusal had wounded her. When the private hissed through his teeth, she paused exactly long enough for him to breathe. Not more. Not less. By the time she finished wrapping the bandage, his hand had stopped trembling. He did not apologize. She did not require it. That evening, Daniel found her outside the rear entrance, standing beneath the overhang where rainwater still dripped from the gutters. The sky had cleared. Smoke hung over the ruined town in thin gray sheets, and somewhere far away artillery muttered like weather. You never told me, he said. Anna kept looking at the courtyard. No one asked. The answer had no bitterness in it. That made it worse. Daniel held the documents in one hand. You should have said something. She turned then. Her face was calm, but tired in a way sleep could not repair. Captain, when a woman is captured, hungry, and wearing a prisoner coat, people do not hear what she says about herself. Daniel had no reply. Behind them, the hospital lamps burned in the broken windows of the school. Inside, someone called for the German nurse. Not the prisoner. Not the enemy. The nurse. Anna heard it. So did Daniel. For the first time that day, neither of them corrected the room. Sometimes the greatest test of a person's character is not whether they can save a life. It is whether they are willing to risk their reputation so someone else may continue saving lives. The field hospital awakened before sunrise. Cold mist drifted across the school courtyard, wrapping the shattered buildings in pale gray silence. Dew gathered on abandoned military crates while a lone American flag above the entrance stirred gently in the morning breeze. For a few precious minutes, the gun seemed impossibly far away. Inside the gymnasium, lanterns still burned. The night shift had become the morning shift without anyone noticing. Coffee simmered inside dented enamel pots. Bandages hung drying beside cracked windows. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the cool air like a promise that disease could still be held back for another day. Daniel Carter stood beside a folding desk reviewing casualty reports when a military jeep rolled into the courtyard. Two officers stepped out. Military police. Neither looked pleased. One carried a leather folder beneath his arm. The other surveyed the hospital with the practiced expression of a man searching for mistakes. Lieutenant Harris saw them first. They're here for the prisoner records. Daniel closed the report. I expected that. Within minutes, the officers entered the gymnasium. Patients watched quietly from their cots. Orderlies slowed their work. Even whispered conversations seemed to fade. The senior officer removed several documents from the folder. Captain Carter? Yes. We're conducting a review of civilian detainees currently assigned to your facility. Daniel nodded. Go ahead. The officer glanced toward Anna, who was helping an elderly woman adjust her blanket. Anna Weiss. She stepped forward calmly. Yes. The officer opened another file. Former civilian nurse. He looked at her. Correct. Yes. You were never commissioned into the German Army Medical Corps? No. You were employed at Dresden Municipal Hospital until its military requisition? Yes. You remained there treating civilians after military occupation? Yes. Every answer was brief. Precise. Without explanation. The officer continued reading. No record of party membership. No disciplinary actions. No criminal charges. No intelligence concerns. He looked toward Daniel. Our investigation confirms the documents. Lieutenant Harris released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Several nearby nurses exchanged quiet glances. The officer removed one final sheet. Captain, Miss Weiss was classified with prisoners during emergency evacuation because transportation records were incomplete after the bombing. The designation was administrative, not criminal. Administrative. One ordinary word. Yet it erased weeks of silent assumptions. Daniel accepted the paperwork. He read every line. Not because he doubted it. Because he wanted to understand exactly how easily a human life could disappear beneath a clerical mistake. The officer closed his folder. She remains a civilian under temporary supervision until relocation procedures are completed. Daniel nodded once. Understood. The officers departed as quietly as they had arrived. The jeep disappeared beyond the school gate. For several moments, no one spoke. Then someone from the far side of the gymnasium called out. Nurse Weiss. A young medic stood beside a frightened civilian child. Could you come here? Not Mississippi. Not prisoner. Not German. Nurse. Anna walked over without hesitation. Nothing about her expression changed. She comforted the child exactly as she had done yesterday. Exactly as she would have done had no investigation ever taken place. Daniel watched from across the room. The paperwork had changed nothing about her. It had only changed everyone else. Later that afternoon, another difficult operation began. A fragment of twisted metal had lodged dangerously close to an American lieutenant's femoral artery. The procedure demanded absolute concentration. Daniel extended his hand. Clamp. The instrument appeared immediately. Sutures. Already waiting. Saline. Anna anticipated the request before the sentence had ended. The operation lasted nearly 3 hours. When it was over, the lieutenant's pulse remained strong. Daniel removed his gloves slowly. He looked around the operating area. No one seemed surprised anymore that Anna stood beside him. No whispers. No doubtful glances. Only quiet cooperation. Lieutenant Harris folded the final dressing. "I think," she said softly, "people stopped seeing the coat." Daniel followed her gaze. Anna still wore the same faded gray prisoner coat over her simple clothes. Nothing about it had changed. Yet somehow, no one noticed it anymore. They noticed her steady hands, her calm voice, her unwavering attention to every patient, regardless of language or uniform. Daniel understood then that respect had never required new clothing, a new title, or official permission. It required only enough time for truth to outlive first impressions. And inside the old school where war had reduced so many people to numbers, Anna Weiss had quietly become something far greater than the label she had been given. She had become indispensable. The war ended quietly for Anna Weiss. Not with church bells, not with cheering crowds, not with flags bright enough to cover the ruins. It ended on an ordinary morning inside a broken school, while pale sunlight entered through cracked windows and fell across rows of empty cots where wounded men had once counted their breaths until sleep finally came. The hospital was closing, not because suffering had ended, only because the front had moved, the paperwork had caught up, and the living were being sent somewhere else to begin the impossible work of continuing. Crates were sealed, tables folded, blood-stained sheets burned behind the building in a black iron barrel. The gymnasium slowly became a room again. Anna stood near the wall where she had first been told to sit. The supply crates were gone now. So were the 12 prisoners who had waited beside her. Only the faint outlines remained on the floor, pale rectangles in the dust where boxes had shielded her from the room that would later need her. Daniel Carter found her there just after noon. He carried a small envelope and the worn leather satchel that had once held the proof of her forgotten life. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer suspicion. It was recognition. "Your transfer papers came through," Daniel said. Anna nodded. "To the civilian medical registry?" "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "They need nurses in the relocation camps." A faint wind moved through the broken window behind her. Somewhere outside, a truck engine started, coughed, and settled into a rough idle. Anna looked down at the papers. For weeks, documents had decided what she was. Prisoner, detainee, civilian, nurse. This time, the word did not feel like a cage. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded strip of white cloth. Anna recognized it before he opened his hand fully. Her old nurse's armband. Washed. Mended. Still marked by a small brown stain that would never disappear completely. "I thought you should have this back," he said. Anna took it carefully. Not quickly. Both hands closed around it, as though it were warmer than cloth should be. "I thought it was lost." So did everyone else. She looked at him then. Daniel's face showed the exhaustion of a man who had survived by not letting himself feel too much too soon. But his voice was steady. "When you arrived," he said, "I saw a prisoner." Anna said nothing. He continued. "That was my mistake." The words were simple. No excuse. No decoration. Just the truth placed where it belonged. Anna folded the armband once. Then again. "You saw what the war taught you to see." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I saw less than I should have." Outside, a driver called her name from the courtyard. Not her number. Her name. Nurse Anna Weiss. She lifted the satchel onto her shoulder. Before leaving, she turned toward the gymnasium one last time. The room was nearly empty now, yet she could still hear it. Rain against glass. Children crying. Boots crossing old basketball lines. Daniel's voice asking one impossible question. "Can you help?" She had entered that room as a label. She was leaving it as a person restored to herself. At the doorway, Daniel stood aside. Not in command. In respect. Anna stepped into the sunlight. The ruined town waited beyond the school gates, wounded and uncertain, but alive enough to need careful hands. Behind her, Daniel watched until she reached the truck. She did not wave. She did not need to. Some departures carried more dignity in silence. Years later, he would remember many things about that hospital. The blood, the rain, the impossible arithmetic of survival. But most of all, he would remember the quiet German woman no one had thought to ask. She had not raised her voice. She had raised the standard.